that's a good segue into the dissident dialogues. All right, so I saw you actually did a sit down with Winston, who I'm going to invite on, because as you know, we did that short interview outside. Um, I was very critical of a kind of uniformity of foreign policy in that festival, particularly in regards to Israel, in regards to Ukraine, in regards to China, in regards to Iran. I saw nothing at that festival that could not have come out of an Anthony Blinken PowerPoint presentation, which I thought was remarkable for a festival called the Dissident Dialogues. Particularly now on your panel, that was the only panel where they had just, I forget the name of the act, they had just passed the act in Congress of trying to essentially criminalize being anti-Israel on college campuses, or anti-Zionist, I should say. And everybody, that's all well and good. Everyone agreed that that was a bad bill. I didn't I don't think that was mentioned anywhere else the entire weekend, and it had just passed a couple of days before. So now you get a lot of people. I spoke to Winston and Desh afterwards. I did an interview with both of them, and they said, and I believe them, that they had a hard time getting anyone who represented any other point of view to agree to do it. And talking to Brianna, I caught up with Brianna Joy Gray there, and she told me what it took for them to get her to do it. So I know they wanted to, because they met her request without getting into detail to get her there. So I take them at their word there. But my question is really, why so many people in the so-called intellectual dark web, right? Dawkins, McWhorter, Pinker, Brett Weinstein, they're all pro-Zionist, like absolutely no variation in opinion, and generally on Russia, on Ukraine. That is very surprising to me from people who really pride themselves on being intellectually dependent. Where do you think that comes from? Why is that?
It's a good question. I've struggled with that as well. There's no particular tribe, and that's a good thing. And maybe I should not join any movement or label for my ideas or my principles or values. Maybe I don't fit in anywhere, and I'm fine with that, because I was kind of vaguely associated with parts of the progressive left, but then on issues of identity, of public safety, and on some of these issues around Russia, I felt kind of excommunicated, and maybe it wasn't appropriate for me to affiliate in any way, although I had no official affiliation. It's really just kind of,
Right.
You kind of get grouped in these type of things. And on this kind of anti-woke IDW world, because I was critical of censorship, critical of efforts to, the cancel culture dynamic of shutting people down who have simple, genuine differences of opinion and different viewpoints, I kind of got grouped in with this world. And, again, like I don't want to subscribe to anyone else's beliefs, because, in my view, there is quite a bit of hypocrisy here. The way that the term anti-Semitism is used as a intellectual shortcut, as kind of a rhetorical shortcut to shut down debate around foreign policy, around what Israel does in terms of its relation to its neighbors and its relationship to the Palestinians, is identical to the way that the term racist or transphobe or neo-Nazi is used in the domestic context to shut down conservative speech. This kind of fragility of victimhood, of saying, oh, we've got to have speech codes and censorship and safe spaces to protect Jewish students from any of these debates, is the exact same formulation that we heard for a decade from liberals as they were making up excuses to shut down conservative speakers. Now, of course, there are racists in society. There are anti-Semites. That is dangerous. But, as I think a lot of these IDW people have articulated in other areas, the best response to bad speech is better speech.
Right.
You're not going to make this go away by strangling it, by forcing people with new hate speech codes or social media censorship to shut up about a real phenomenon, a real policy issue. I mean, this is a big debate that we should be having in society about what our country is doing in terms of providing this aid and military assistance to what Israel is doing in our name, essentially. I wish we could have an evidence-based, rational discussion around these decisions by our government that isn't clouded by attempts to cancel and stigmatize. And it's unfortunate that I don't think everyone's in this world. There's quite a few people when I've gone to some of these conferences that pull me aside and say, look, I wish we had a bigger debate on these Israel issues, on Russia and Ukraine and some of these foreign policy issues. It doesn't make sense that it's not a bigger issue, especially given like what I've written about in the last few weeks, that there's Israeli intelligence officers who are creating social media censorship groups that are working with the big platforms that is identical to the same type of censorship that we just talked about in these same IDW forums around COVID and around identity politics.
Well, that's what's so remarkable. That's what's so remarkable, because after October 7th, they all flipped on a dime. And as someone who I think, like yourself, is in empathy with a lot of their views that they had been expressing about censorship and the culture wars, I've covered a lot of those subjects, and I'm very aligned with a lot of points of view expressed by a lot of those figures. I've enjoyed a lot of McWhorter's observations about DEI. I agree with them. And to see all of these figures just have one opinion about Israel, what's so bothersome about it is, as you know, if you're kind of nominally left, I think it's fair to say, you're constantly trying to argue with people on the left who've swallowed a lot of these cultural precepts and argue, no, to oppose this is not Western chauvinism. It's not about that. And then as soon as October 7th happened, I think they discredited everything that they had said before because they proved their critics right. How do you explain it other than, well, at core, you're just Western chauvinists, and Israel is a more Western coded country in your eyes than their enemies, so you just align with them without really digging into the rights and wrongs of the conflict, because most of these people are brilliant people. They're capable of reading a history book. They're capable of educating themselves about the subject. To have such a just one note interpretation, I mean, the most extreme version of this, you get a lot of people in the left space who will say they're working with the three-letter agencies. Their job is to direct people who might be discontented culturally in a certain direction in their views on foreign policy. Now, Occam's razor, I think, you can't prove it. You can't really go there. But the Western chauvinism, I think, is self-evident. I don't know how else to really explain the uniformity of this opinion among people who had been contradicting what they're saying now 5 minutes before October 7th.
No, I think that's right. I mean, and Israel, to its credit, for citizens of Israel, and particularly Jewish citizens of Israel, they do enjoy a degree of freedom and kind of Western style democracy that is very uncommon in that part of the world. And people see this and say, hey, this is something that's worth defending. And
well, that's it. They have completely, I'm sorry to cut you off, but that's it. They have completely bought into the clash of civilizations framing that we saw post 9/11. And this goes back to, if you followed the work of Hitchens at that time, Dawkins, who's still around, obviously, Harris, they totally bought that. And they have a very transactional approach to liberal values. Liberal values should only be enjoyed by people who buy into them, right? And they don't see the people in the Middle East, broadly speaking, as having any appreciation for those values. So why should we afford them and people sympathetic to their cause freedom of speech? When in Gaza, they'll throw you off a roof if you're gay. That's how they think. And that is absolutely a Western chauvinist attitude. And I think it's a blatant. I think it's just plainly a racist attitude. But
Well,
that certain people
look,
are not worthy of these rights because their culture does not, lend itself to what our ideal of a free society is. That's not our call, and it certainly does not justify broad-based indiscriminate violence against those populations, which in these people's minds it obviously does.
Yeah, there's part of me that is sympathetic to the Western chauvinism and Enlightenment ideas are just better than other, other systems. But I would just, when I see these arguments from the IDW crowd or from others, many people make these arguments. It's just, having gone to Israel, having gone to the West Bank, having read a lot about this conflict and followed it very closely, since October 7th, Israel just doesn't live up to its ideals in any way when it comes to the Palestinians. And I think if they did apply Western Enlightenment ideas around democracy and rule of law and, judging an individual by their behavior, not as a group identity, then there would be no dispute. There'd be no issue. The fact is that it's a race-based society in a way that no other Western industrialized country is. Right. They view race differently than we do in the U.S. In the U.S., it's so much about skin color tone and nation of origin. There, it's a very Middle Eastern country. Just like how Turkey is divided between Kurds and Turks who might look the same, but because of these deeply encoded ethnic differences, there's incredible division in terms of how human beings are treated on a racial basis. In Israel, it's the same kind of religion, ethnic code that is true all over the Middle East. And there's no Western industrialized country in the world where a third of the population, lives with an entirely different rule set that's under military occupation. 15 million people live between the river and the sea, all under Israeli control since 1967. 1/3 of those people live in constant state of military domination to one degree or another, because the West Bank and Gaza are different systems, but still, these are people that don't have sovereignty that live under Israeli rule. That's not true about America. Maybe you could make the argument that Guam or some other territory does not, those citizens don't enjoy the same sovereignty as other American citizens. You can make that argument, but that's 0.0001% of Americans. In Israel, it's 1/3 of the population that lives in this kind of apartheid state. And if Israel was like Italy or Austria or, South Korea or Taiwan, there would be an integration here, or just saying, hey, right, then let the Palestinians have their own country, let them do their own thing. But they can't have it both ways. They can't say that they're a Western industrialized country, but then not play by the same rules of Western industrialized countries that have democratic rights for all of its citizens. A third of the population lives with an entirely different rule set. So, for me, I feel like we had it would be nice to debate these issues with pro-Israel advocates, because it's like, I'm in favor of the Enlightenment democratic system, but it's not what's practiced in Israel. It's practiced on a racial basis. That's just not true. That it doesn't comport with Western standards.
Yeah, and I would say even if it were practiced, it's not a license to kill. That's the thing. They see it as a license to kill. They see their perceived cultural superiority, which is subjective. And look, as a guy who now makes his living running his big fat fucking mouth, yes, I enjoy living in places where I'm free to run my big fat fucking mouth. That doesn't give me a right to occupy and control and police and kill people who don't run their society in that way. And once you take it to that point, it becomes just rank warmongering. And now Israel has taken that to a genocidal scale.
Yeah, well, look, I wish there was a more holistic debate and empathetic debate, and just holding people to their own standards. In Israel, I'm sure you've seen, and in the West Bank, there are Palestinians, Palestinian and Jews who live near each other in the West Bank. The Jews, by nature of being Jews, they have citizenship in Israel. They can vote, and when they get in trouble, they go to civil courts. There's Palestinians that are living in essentially the same communities, maybe just a few miles apart. If they get in trouble, they go to military courts. They can't vote for the military that rules over them. And they don't have free speech. If we want to talk about free speech as such an inherent value like the IDW does, if you're a Palestinian, you post a meme about October 7th, the Israeli military will come and bulldoze your home. Now, if you're an Israeli citizen, if you're a Jewish citizen of those same communities, you can go on. I joined on Telegram a bunch of Israeli chats, and they're very
I could only imagine.
Controversial, to say the least. I'm in one Telegram chat where the people are posting memes of dogs eating dead bodies of Palestinians in Gaza. And these are Israeli citizens. Are they going to get in trouble for posting controversial or violent memes? I don't think so. So there's free speech for Israelis and no free speech for Palestinians on a racial basis. Who can defend this? I would love to see someone defend this.
Please clap.